Welcome to Alien Glow. Sit back, enjoy the story, and if you want more real, powerful content, don't forget like and subscribe this video, and turn on the bell icon right now. Let's begin. The cute alien clockmaker repaired one human's broken watch. At noon, time stopped for everyone else. In the old market of Vera Station, where brass bells rang above narrow streets and giant clock faces turned in the walls of towers older than memory, people came to buy many things, but most came to buy more time. They came with nervous eyes and tired hands, with machines to fix and promises to keep, with train tickets, wedding rings, army letters, medical reports, and tiny watches inherited from fathers and mothers who were already gone. In that city, time was not just measured, it was worshipped. Every hour was announced by a chorus of iron chimes. Every minute was counted by glowing lines on the high public dial in the square, and every second seemed to belong to someone rich enough to control it. But hidden between a lantern shop and an old tea stall, there was a smaller workshop that did not belong to the wealthy and did not serve the powerful. Its sign was crooked, its window was fogged with dust and silver steam, and hanging above the door was a single line written in faded blue paint. Broken things are welcome here. Most people passed without noticing it, but those who were hurting often stopped without knowing why. Inside that little shop worked a young alien clockmaker named Lyra Vale. She was small and graceful, with silver white hair that shone like moonlit thread, skin so pale it seemed lit from within, and soft glowing marks near her temple and cheek that brightened whenever she touched metal, gears, or glass. Her ears were long and fine, her hands delicate, and her eyes carried the strange stillness of someone who listened not only to voices, but to the spaces between them. She did not speak much, but when she did, people lowered their own voices to hear her. She repaired watches, wall clocks, pocket timers, starship chronometers, and old mechanical hearts built into ceremonial statues. She could rebuild a spring from memory, balance a failing gear by touch, and hear faults that other masters needed magnifiers to find. And yet, despite all that skill, people whispered that what made Lyra different was not her talent. It was her sadness. Nobody knew where she came from, only that she had arrived years earlier from a broken refugee convoy beyond the rim routes. After a war no one on Vera wanted to talk about, her people, the Orlans, had once been famous for their timecraft. Not time travel, not the kind told in foolish myths, but time resonance, the science of memory inside motion, of emotion inside rhythm, of grief stored in repeated ticks, and carried through generations by objects that never stopped moving. Then the war came, and most of her kind vanished. So when Lyra fixed a watch, people said she did not only mend metal. She listened for what pain had been trapped inside it. And one cold noon, when the market was loud with voices and steam trams rolled over the stone rails, a human man walked into her shop carrying a watch that had not moved in 7 years. His name was Daniel Hart. He was 36, with tired shoulders, careful hands, and the face of someone who had spent too long pretending he was fine. He wore a weathered jacket, dust on his sleeves, and on his wrist sat a large dark watch that still worked, but in his hand he held another one, older, smaller, and completely dead. The moment Lyra saw it, the glowing mark on her cheek brightened. Daniel noticed. "Can you fix it?" he asked. Lyra did not answer at once. She looked at the broken watch the way some people look at gravestones. "Where did you get this?" she said softly. Daniel swallowed before replying. "It was my father's," he said. "It stopped the day he died, noon exactly. I tried every repair shop on the station, every collector, every machine specialist. No one could fix it. Some said the movement was warped. Some said the inner balance wheel looked burned. Some said I should stop carrying a dead thing and move on." Lyra held out her hand. Daniel gave her the watch. The instant it touched her palm, a sharp ticking burst through the room, not in the air, but somewhere deeper, somewhere beneath hearing, like a heartbeat remembered by the bones. Daniel's face changed. "You heard that too," he whispered. Lyra nodded once. "This watch is not broken the way others mean it," she said. Daniel stared at her. "Then what is wrong with it?" Lyra lifted her eyes to his. "It is waiting." Outside, the noon bells began preparing for the hour, the market swelling with footsteps, vendors calling, children laughing, steel carts rattling over stone. Inside the shop, all of it suddenly felt far away. Daniel gave a weak laugh that sounded more frightened than amused. Waiting for what? Lyra turned the watch over, thumb brushing the cracked casing. There was an inscription on the back, nearly rubbed away by years of use. For every hour I miss, remember I loved you still. Daniel looked down fast, as though the words hurt more now than when they were first carved. My father had that engraved before he left for field service, he said. He worked the outer rail lines, emergency repairs, storm zones, dangerous routes. He always said he would come back in time for lunch. Even when I was little, it became a joke between us. Noon meant he was safe. Noon meant he made it through another morning. His voice tightened. Then one day the line collapsed in a magnetic storm. They found his crew, and his watch stopped at 12. Mine never started again after that. I kept thinking if I fixed it, something in me might fix too, but it never happened. Lyra opened the back of the watch carefully. There was no visible movement, and yet Daniel could hear something now, a faint hidden rhythm, like distant steps in a long hallway. This is Orlan work, Lyra said quietly. Daniel frowned. My father was human. I know, she said, but years ago, before the war, some of my people traded in memory-tuned mechanisms, rare commissions, expensive and deeply personal. This was made by someone who knew how to bind emotional resonance to motion. It does not simply tell time. It remembers a promise. Daniel could barely breathe. Can you repair it? Lyra's face grew still. Maybe, she said, but if I do, you must understand something first. He waited. Sometimes a broken watch is merciful, she said. Sometimes it stops because the heart carrying it could not bear one more second. Sometimes if you force it forward, all the pain it held still comes rushing out at once. Daniel looked at the watch in her hand. I already live with the pain, he said. I would rather hear the truth than keep listening to silence. For the first time, Lyra smiled. Very small, very sad. That is always what brave people say before truth arrives. She motioned for him to sit. The workshop around them seemed to breathe. Clock hands of every size lined the walls. Brass pendulums swung in slow gold arcs. Soft blue instruments glowed beneath glass domes, and high above, an unfinished mechanical star rotated in silence. Lyra placed the watch on a velvet cloth beneath a hanging lens. Then she lit a narrow silver flame beneath a crystal coil, and the air filled with a sound like rain tapping on distant windows. Daniel leaned forward. What are you doing? Listening, Lyra said. She closed her eyes and touched 2 fingers to the watch. At once, the clocks on the wall shifted, just slightly, not enough to stop, but enough to feel wrong. A second hand skipped. A pendulum slowed. The room seemed to inhale and hold it. Lyra's glowing mark brightened into a thin blue line across her cheekbone. Daniel's dead watch trembled. Then a single click broke the stillness. Lyra opened her eyes sharply. Do not touch anything, she said. Daniel froze. What did you find? Lyra stared at the watch as though it had whispered directly into her mind. Not what? She said. Who? Daniel's mouth went dry. What do you mean, who? Lyra looked at him with real concern now. Your father's final moment is still inside this mechanism. Not the whole man, not his soul, not a ghost, but an imprint, strong enough to resist time, strong enough to refuse ending. He did not stop this watch because he died. Daniel. Daniel leaned in, pulse racing. Then why did it stop? Lyra's voice dropped almost to a whisper. Because he chose to stop it. A heavy silence filled the room. Outside, the first noon bell rang. Daniel felt that sound in his chest. No, he said, barely able to get the word out. Why would anyone do that? Lyra's gaze did not move from the watch. To leave something unfinished on purpose, she said, so that someone he loved would come looking for the last missing second. Daniel's hand shook on the table. Are you saying he left me a message? Lyra answered with painful honesty. I am saying he tried. The second noon bell rang outside. Then the third. The workshop lights flickered. Every clock in the room began to tick in the same rhythm. Daniel stood halfway from his chair. Is that supposed to happen? No, Lyra said. The fourth bell struck, and the street outside went silent. Not quieter, not calmer, silent. No wagon wheels, no footsteps, no voices, no bell echo, no steam, nothing. Daniel turned toward the window. The market beyond the fog glass had frozen. A woman carrying fruit stood motionless beside a stall. A child running with a paper kite was suspended mid-step. Steam from a cart hung in the air like sculpture. Even the pigeons above the square had stopped in mid-flight. Daniel stumbled backward. What is happening? Lyra arose slowly, fear in her face for the first time. It reached noon, she said. And your father's watch answered. Daniel looked from the window to her glowing eyes. What does that mean? Lyra swallowed. It means time has stopped for everyone except the one standing closest to the promise. Daniel stared at the dead watch, which was no longer dead. Its hands now pointed exactly to 12. And beneath the crystal, for the first time in 7 years, the second hand moved. Not forward, backward. A cold wave passed through the room. Lyra grabbed a brass key from her workbench and slipped it into a device mounted under the table. A shield of blue light spread softly around them. Stay near me, she said. Daniel could hardly think. Can we fix this? Lyra looked at the watch and then at him. Yes, she said, but not by repairing the mechanism. We have to finish what your father started. Daniel's voice broke. How? Lyra reached for his hand, then stopped just before touching it, giving him the choice. By following the missing second, he placed his hand in hers. The moment their skin met, the workshop vanished. The world around them unfolded into light, gears, wind, and memory. Daniel felt the floor disappear and then return beneath his feet, but it was no longer the workshop floor. He stood on an outer rail platform under a storm-black sky, metal beams screaming in heavy magnetic wind, warning lights flashing across rain-soaked equipment, and distant workers shouting through static-filled comms. Lyra stood beside him, her hair lifting an unseen current. Memory field, she said. Stay close, do not chase echoes. Daniel turned and saw him. A man in weather gear at the far side of the damaged rail station, kneeling beside a cracked power conduit, trying to stabilize a collapsing line before it reached the civilian shuttle dock. His father, older than Daniel remembered in some ways, younger in others, alive with urgency, moving fast, one arm bleeding, jaw set in fierce concentration. Daniel's breath left him completely. Dad. The figure did not react. Lyra's voice came gently. He cannot hear you yet. This is the moment before the imprint sealed. They watched as alarms screamed through the station. Workers ran toward evacuation pods, and sparks rained from a torn relay tower above the platform. Daniel saw two things at once. His father was trying to repair the system, and he was looking, over and over, at the watch on his wrist. Noon was close. He promised me lunch, Daniel whispered, stunned by the simplicity of it. Even here, even now, he was watching the time. Lyra's eyes softened. Some promises become stronger under fear, not weaker. A violent tremor shook the platform. A support beam snapped, and a cargo carriage began sliding toward a lower civilian corridor where dozens of people were trapped behind a jammed emergency gate. Daniel saw his father understand the choice instantly. He could run and live, or stay and reroute the power manually to free the civilians before the collapse. His father looked once more at the watch, then at a small folded photograph tucked into the inside of his glove. Daniel knew without seeing it that the picture was of them together. He felt his throat burn. No, Daniel whispered. No, please go, just go. But his father ran toward the emergency relay. The memory storm roared louder, lights flashing through rain and steam, and Daniel watched the man he had spent 7 years mourning plant both hands on a live control wheel and force power through a dead system by sheer strength and will. The locked gate below burst open. People fled. Children, workers, mechanics, medics, all escaping through smoke and debris. His father looked up, saw them safe, and smiled through blood and rain. Then the main conduit above him ruptured. The explosion of light should have ended everything. But in the frozen white second before impact, his father reached up, tore off his watch, and slammed its crown inward with his thumb. The watch stopped at noon, and the memory did not end. Daniel stared in shock. He stopped his own final second, he said. Lyra nodded, tears bright in her eyes. To keep one unfinished moment alive, long enough for someone to find it. Why? Daniel said, voice cracking. Why not let it end? Lyra looked toward the frozen image of his father. Because there was still something he had not said. The world shifted again. Now they stood not outside the memory, but inside its last held breath. The explosion remained around them like glass lightning. His father was suspended before them, not moving, but not gone. His face turned slightly toward where no one had stood until now. Then slowly, impossibly, his eyes moved. Not to Lyra, To Daniel. Daniel stopped breathing. His father saw him. The man's lips parted, and though the air itself was frozen, his voice arrived as if spoken directly into Daniel's chest. You took your time, kid. Daniel broke. A cry tore out of him, raw and helpless and years too late. Dad. His father smiled, the same tired, warm smile Daniel had been terrified of forgetting. I did not have much left, he said, so I hid 1 second where only you would think to look. I knew you would keep the watch. I knew you would carry what you should never have had to carry. Daniel was shaking so hard, he could barely stand. Why did you not come back? He said. Why did you promise if you knew you might not make it? His father's eyes filled. Because fathers lie about danger when children are small, he said, and then one day the children grow up and discover the lie was love wearing work boots. Daniel laughed and sobbed at once. I waited, he said. I waited every day for so long. I know, his father said, that is why I am sorry. The memory around them creaked, the held second weakening. Lyra stepped back, giving them space, but her face had gone pale. Daniel, she said quietly, the imprint is collapsing. He cannot stay much longer. Daniel looked at her in panic. There has to be more time. Lyra's voice trembled. There never is. That is why moments matter. His father lifted a hand toward Daniel. The hand trembled in frozen light. Listen to me now, he said, and listen hard. Daniel stepped forward. You are not broken because you could not fix this watch, his father said. You were never meant to carry my ending like a failed repair. You were meant to live past it, past me, past this station, past the guilt, past all of it. Daniel's face was wet with tears. I could not save you. His father's expression deepened with fierce love. You were a child, he said. There was never anything for you to save. Daniel lowered his head, years of blame collapsing inside him. His father continued. You want to know why I stopped the watch? It was not to trap myself. It was to keep grief from becoming your only inheritance. I needed one last chance to tell you that what happened to me was not your fault. Not for 1 second. Not for one breath. Not for one day you have suffered since. The frozen storm around them began to crack with soft lines of gold. Lyra touched the stopped air and winced. Daniel, we must close it soon, or the station outside will remain frozen longer than the field can bear. Daniel looked from her to his father, desperate, childish, unwilling, honest. I am not ready. His father smiled sadly. No son ever is. Then he reached into the frozen inside pocket of his coat, and from it pulled a tiny brass gear no larger than a coin. Daniel recognized it instantly. When he was 10, he had broken his father's work timer while trying to impress him by fixing it alone. He had cried all night over the missing gear, but his father had hugged him and said some small lost things do not ruin the whole machine. I kept it, his father said. Daniel stared, shattered by the fact. Why? Because you thought losing one small piece made you a failure, his father said, and I wanted to remember to teach you otherwise. He pressed the gear into Daniel's hand. You have spent 7 years believing one broken moment ruined your whole life. It did not. You hear me, it did not. Daniel closed his fingers around the gear, as if it were warmth itself. I miss you, he whispered. His father's face softened into something almost unbearably gentle. That, he said, is the tax love asks when it leaves first. Then his voice grew stronger. But you are still here, Daniel Hart, so do not stand in the graveyard of noon for the rest of your life. Build something, love someone, laugh loudly, forgive badly, and then better, eat on time, sleep more, fix what you can, and when you cannot fix it, hold it with kindness anyway. The golden cracks spread through the frozen second. Lyra stepped close now, breathing hard. Daniel, it is time. He turned to her, terrified of what that meant. If we close this, he goes. Yes, she said. And if we do not? She looked toward the cracking storm, toward the silent city trapped outside. Then everyone else remains stuck inside his unfinished second, and the memory tears itself apart. Daniel looked back at his father. The man stood in failing light, smiling through the breaking edges of time. You really came back for lunch, Daniel said with a broken laugh. His father answered with the old warmth. Daniel had been hungry for half his life. Told you I would try. Daniel inhaled the deepest breath of his life, stepped forward, and embraced him. For one impossible instant, the hug was real. Rain, metal, blood, warmth, the smell of oil and storm, the weight of a father's arms around a son who had needed them for 7 endless years. Then the light began to take him. Daniel pulled back, crying openly now. "I love you." His father's answer came as the world dissolved. "I know, and I loved you at noon, and I love you still." Lyra took Daniel's hand. "Turn the watch forward," she said. His fingers shook as he looked down. The stopped watch rested in his palm, hands locked at 12, second hand trembling between backward and stillness. He turned the crown one click, then one more. The second hand jumped forward. The memory shattered into gold, and the world returned. Daniel and Lyra were back in the workshop. The market outside exploded back into motion all at once, fruit dropping into baskets, birds finishing their wings, steam carts hissing, noon bells completing the hour as if nothing had happened. No one outside knew a thing. But inside the shop, everything had changed. Daniel was on his knees, breathing hard, tears falling freely onto the wooden floor. Lyra stood over the bench, one hand braced against it, exhausted, the glow on her cheek dim and faint. The watch in Daniel's hand was ticking normally now. Steady. Alive. Noon had passed. Daniel stared at the moving hands as if they were sunlight made mechanical. "It is working," he whispered. Lyra nodded weakly. "The promise is finished." Daniel rose slowly, still dazed, and looked at her. "You gave me back the last thing I never thought I would have." Lyra's smile carried old grief inside it. "No," she said. "He did. I only opened the door." Daniel stepped closer. "Why did you help me?" Lyra looked around the workshop, at the clocks, the careful tools, the soft blue instruments built for mending what others gave up on. "Because," she said quietly, "no one came back for my father at all." Daniel's heart tightened. Lyra lowered her eyes. "When the war took my world, there was no hidden second, no unfinished promise, no one to explain, no one to tell me it was not my fault. I built this place because I could not save the people I loved, so I learned to save whatever time they had left behind in objects others would throw away." Daniel did not speak for a long moment. Then he said softly, "You save people too, not just watches." Lyra gave the smallest shrug, as though praise sat uneasily on her shoulders. "Sometimes," she said, "people let themselves be found while asking for repairs." The afternoon light warmed the window, turning the dust in the workshop to gold. Daniel looked at the ticking watch again, then at the tiny brass gear in his hand, then at Lyra. He had come into the shop thinking he needed a machine repaired. Instead, he had been handed back a future. He laughed once through tears. "My father told me to eat on time," he said, sounding stunned by the normalness of it. "After all this, that is somehow what hurts most." Lyra smiled with her eyes this time. Good advice usually sounds ordinary. Daniel glanced toward the tea stall outside. Then he turned back to her. "Would you, maybe, if you are not busy, have lunch with me?" Lyra blinked. "Lunch?" "Yes," he said, "at a reasonable hour. For once, no broken watches, no frozen cities, just lunch." A small silence followed, fragile and bright. Then Lyra looked at the clocks on her wall, each one ticking in its own recovered rhythm. "I think," she said, "I can make the time." Daniel laughed again, properly this time. And for the first time in years, the sound did not feel like betrayal. They stepped outside together into the living afternoon of Vera Station, where people hurried, bargained, worried, and loved without any idea how close the world had come to pausing forever inside one unfinished promise. The market smelled of tea leaves, brass smoke, bread, and engine oil. A child chased a kite across the square. An old mechanic argued cheerfully over prices. A woman in work gloves checked the station clock and rushed toward a tram with flowers in her arms. Time had resumed for everyone. But for Daniel, it had finally begun again. As they walked, he looked down at his father's watch. It no longer felt like a gravestone. It felt like a hand on his shoulder, steady and warm, pushing him gently forward. Beside him, Lyra moved with quiet grace through the crowd, her silver hair catching daylight, her glowing mark now faint as a memory healing into scar. Daniel realized then that some people enter your life not to take away pain, but to help you survive meeting it at last. He did not know what would come next. He did not know whether lunch would become friendship, or friendship would become something deeper, or whether tomorrow would hurt again in ways he could not yet predict. But he knew this. The dead second at noon was over. The watch was alive. The promise had been heard. And somewhere beyond all machines, all storms, and all endings, A father who had once stopped time for love had finally been allowed to let it go. Daniel lifted his face to the station sky and breathed in the sound of the living city. The bells above the market rang the quarter hour, not as a warning, not as a loss, but as a beginning. And in the little workshop behind them, above the crooked door that welcomed broken things, every clock kept ticking as if it knew the truth most people spend their whole lives learning. What stops can start again. What breaks can still be cherished. And what is loved deeply enough does not disappear when time moves on. It becomes the reason we do too.